Creating not-for-profit financial statements using the Jazzit Financial Statements template. In this video, we'll be taking a look at setting up the Jazzit Financial Statement template for not-for-profit organizations using the restricted fund method. So, jumping right into the Financial Statements template, we first want to set the client profile to not-for-profit. To do this, click on Client Profile in the Home menu. Click on Structure and select Not-for-Profit. Once selected, the individual statements are renamed, as you can see here, Statement of Financial Position and Statement of Fund Balances, etc. You are also informed via this message that pops up that if you are preparing restricted fund statements, you should load the 9-column format. And you are also then provided with instructions for making the switch. Click on OK to clear the message. And following the instructions in that message we just closed, we click on Admin, and this admin panel is made available. Click this button to switch to the 9-column format. And you are invited to save the statements, or not, before they are switched. I'm clicking on Yes. This progress bar appears and runs until the new format has been loaded. Once switched, the same button will provide the opportunity to switch back to the 2-column format. To assign the balances for the individual fund accounts to each column, we need to create an entity for each fund in the Caseware file. This is done using the Consolidate feature in Caseware. So, from the Caseware Document Manager, click on Engagement and then Consolidate. In this example, we are using 3 funds: Operating, Capital Asset, and Endowment. So we need to create an entity for each of these. To create the entity for the Operating Fund, click on New, and for the name, enter Operating Fund. Caseware automatically creates an abbreviation for the name entered, in this case, OF. In this example, we are using internal entities for the 3 funds, so we leave this option for external entities set to No. With the Consolidate feature, you can use this external source option to consolidate the trial balances of multiple external Caseware files. For the purposes of this example, however, we are only using internal entities for the funds, since all the fund accounts are contained in the trial balance of this file. Click on OK to create the entity. And then follow the same steps to create the other 2 entities, Capital Asset and Endowment. Click on New, enter Capital Asset Fund and click on OK. Click on New, enter Endowment Fund and click on OK. When all the entities have been added, click on Apply and then OK. Next, we need to allocate the accounts to the appropriate fund. So click on Account and assign entities. On the left, select all the operating fund accounts, like this. And then on the right, click on Operating Fund, or OF, and click on Assign. The selected accounts have been assigned to the operating fund, and this plus sign appears to the left of the OF. Clicking on the plus sign will indicate the accounts you just assigned to the fund. Next, select all the Capital Asset Fund accounts, like this, and then select Capital Asset Fund on the right, or the CAF, and click Assign. Then, select the remaining accounts for the Endowment Fund, and select Endowment Fund on the right, and click Assign, and Apply, and then OK. On the working trial balance, the entities or the funds, are then indicated as well. The individual trial balances for each fund can be displayed using this context option, where each fund can be selected. So if we select operating fund, for example, all the accounts assigned to the entity operating fund are listed. The same for the other two entities we created. The capital asset fund and the endowment fund. Please remember to set the context back to the parent entity before finalizing your financial statements. So, now that we have all the accounts allocated to the funds, we can map them. From the menu ribbon, select Account, the full unmapped GL appears in the left panel and the full mapping structure in the panel on the right. To keep this video as short as possible, we won't spend time mapping every account. Here I've mapped all except the equity accounts. In order to assign the funds to individual columns, we need to have the fund balances available in separate accounts so that they can be mapped independently. If the fund balances are maintained in a single combined account, you'll have to post a reclass entry to separate them. In this example file, we are using separate accounts. Before we map these fund balances, though, we need to ensure that the net income accounts are all mapped as well. Here, I've selected all the net income accounts on the left. Select the map number for net income on the right, and then click on Map at the bottom to apply the selected map number. Like this. Next, we select the accounts related to the operating fund balance, not the transfers in or transfers out of the operating fund, just the accounts involved with the current fund balance. Then, expanding the mapping structure for the funds by clicking the plus sign to the left, we select the map number 280.0001 for the fund we wish to present in column 1 of the statements. In this case, we are presenting the operating fund in column 1, the capital asset fund in column 2, and the endowment fund in column 3. So, after selecting the accounts for the operating fund and the map number for fund 1, column 1 on the right, we click on Map at the bottom again. To apply the map number 280.0001 to the operating fund balance accounts. Then we repeat the same process for the other two funds, using the map numbers 280.0002 for column 2, which is the capital asset fund, and 280.0003 for column 3 for the endowment fund. Like this. Here we can see the map numbers 280.0002 and 280.0003 assigned to the fund balance accounts. Lastly, we have to map the accounts containing the transfers into or contributions to and the transfers out of or withdrawals from each fund. Here I've selected the accounts containing the amounts transferred into the operating fund. And on the right, we select the map number 280.0001.01. The first section, 280.0001 for fund or column 1, and the final two characters, the .01, for money transferred into the operating fund. And then click on Map again. So now on the right, we see the operating fund balance accounts, and below them, the accounts containing contributions to or transfers into the operating fund. Here I've selected the account containing the amount transferred from or withdrawn from the operating fund. And then I select the same 280.0001 for column or fund 1, followed by the .02 for money leaving the operating fund, and then click Map again. On the right, we see the operating fund balance mapped to 280.0001, the map number for Fund 1 or Column 1, and the amount added to the operating fund 280.0001 followed by .01, and the amount leaving the operating fund 280.0001 followed by the .02. Once these steps have been completed for all three funds, there should be no unmapped accounts remaining on the left. Then click Apply and OK. On the financial statements, we can then assign each individual fund to a separate column. To do this, we first need to select the columns to use. So click on Columns. By default, only the two total columns are enabled, allowing you to select the columns you require. Before we do that though, note that because the Home menu panel is currently in the locked position, the number of rows available in this column selection panel is restricted to just the statements. To free up space and view more options in the column selection panel, we can unlock the Home menu panel and use the controls in the freeze frame instead. To unlock the Home menu, use this button to the right, just click on it, and the dark Home menu panel is now hidden. But now you have access to the column selection panel using this button in the freeze frame. I just need to add a note here for clarification. Although the Home menu is not visible in this unlocked position, it can still be reached by scrolling up in the template. In the unlocked position, it simply frees up screen space. When I scroll up, you can see that the Home menu is still available, but it's no longer a dark gray. It's now this lighter shade, which is simply a visual reminder that it's in the unlocked position. When the Home menu is visible, you can access column settings using either this columns option in the Home menu or the Show Column Settings button in the freeze frame at the top. So, getting back to the column settings, just click this Show Column Settings button, and the column selection panel is presented. But this time the button indicates Show All, and here you can see we have access to more than just the statements. We have access to these other options as well. Now we can select the columns we wish to use for the individual funds. Since we're presenting the three funds separately on the balance sheet and income statement, we can select the columns using these checkboxes. Here I've selected the first three columns for the balance sheet and income statement, since we're only using the two total columns on the statement of cash flows in this example. Now we can assign the entities we created for each fund to the selected columns. Since we're presenting in the order Operating Fund, Capital Asset Fund, and Endowment Fund, we need to select the Operating Fund entity for column 1 using this drop-down and select Operating Fund, like this. Then do the same for the next two columns. Capital Asset Fund in column 2 and Endowment Fund in column 3. Now that we have the funds assigned to the columns, let's look at the presentation on the income statement and the balance sheet. Here we see the line items linked to the trial balance by map number, as they are for any other file. But the individual balances per fund are presented in the columns using the entities assigned to the accounts. The same on the balance sheet. Now let's take a look at the statement of changes in fund balances. The default format for this statement is format A, with the current year presented above the prior year. To switch to the column-based format, click this drop-down and select Format B. When using Format B, you are able to combine it with a statement of revenues and expenditures. Simply by clicking on this button to the left of the statement of changes in fund balances, so that the two statements are combined on the statement index. As indicated here, this fund balances section combined with a statement of revenues and expenditures. Now that we've seen how the two statements can be combined, I'm switching back to the separate statement of changes in fund balances. where the opening balance for each fund is presented on this line, obtained using the map numbers we assigned earlier, starting with 280, indicated here in the linking column. Each fund's balance is assigned to the appropriate column using the entity assigned to the account, as it was on the income statement and balance sheet, indicated here in the heading of each column. The excess of revenue over expenses for each individual fund is obtained from the income statement, shown here. The contributions and withdrawals for each fund, presented below the excess of trade sales on these two separate lines, are obtained using the map numbers we applied earlier, the .01 for contributions to and the .02 for withdrawals from. The contributions and withdrawals for each fund are separated and applied to each column using the entity that had been assigned to each column. The calculated or closing fund balances are then transferred up to the equity section of the balance sheet and presented as shown here.